Analysis: why the U.S. imposition of high tariffs on imports is problematic, causes and consequences. The United States' decision to impose high tariffs on imported goods from other countries has sparked significant global concern. While often justified under the guise of protecting domestic industries or addressing trade imbalances, such measures can be economically counterproductive and politically destabilizing. This analysis explores the rationale behind such tariff hikes, examines the underlying causes, and outlines the potential consequences. Why high tariffs are considered a mistake. Distortion of free trade principles. High tariffs contradict the principles of free and fair trade. They interfere with the natural flow of goods based on comparative advantage, leading to inefficient allocation of resources globally. Retaliation in trade wars. When the U.S. increases tariffs, affected countries often respond with their own tariffs on American goods. This tit-for-tat approach can escalate into trade wars, harming both economies involved. Higher costs for consumers and businesses. Tariffs function as a tax on imports. This leads to higher prices for imported goods, which are either absorbed by businesses, reducing their profits, or passed on to consumers, thereby increasing the cost of living. Disruption of global supply chains. Modern production depends heavily on global supply chains. High tariffs disrupt these supply chains, making it more expensive and less efficient for U.S. companies to manufacture goods. Undermining global economic cooperation. Tariff hikes erode trust between trading partners and weaken multilateral institutions like the World Trade Organization, WTO, making it harder to resolve future disputes diplomatically. 2. Causes of U.S. tariff increases. Trade deficit concerns. A persistent U.S. trade deficit has led to political pressure to reduce imports and increase domestic manufacturing. Tariffs are often used as a tool to curb imports and narrow the deficit. Protection of strategic industries. Sectors such as steel, aluminum, and semiconductors are often protected for national security reasons. The U.S. government may impose tariffs to prevent over-reliance on foreign suppliers. Political strategy and populism. High tariffs often resonate with domestic political audiences, particularly in regions hit hard by globalization. Politicians may use tariffs to appeal to protectionist sentiments among voters. Unfair trade practices. The U.S. accuses some countries, notably China, of unfair trade practices, including intellectual property theft, state subsidies, and currency manipulation. Tariffs are seen as a countermeasure. 3. Consequences of high tariffs. Slowed economic growth. Reduced international trade can drag down economic growth, both domestically and globally. Businesses facing higher input costs may cut investment and hiring. Inflationary pressures. As imported goods become more expensive, inflation can rise. This poses additional challenges for central banks already dealing with price stability. Reduced competitiveness. Shielding domestic industries from competition may lead to complacency and lower innovation. In the long term, this harms competitiveness rather than improving it. Damaged diplomatic relations. Countries targeted by tariffs may reduce cooperation in other areas such as security, climate change, or global health. Economic tensions can spill over into geopolitics. Impact on developing nations. High U.S. tariffs hurt low-income countries that depend on exports for economic development. This may increase global inequality and hinder progress in poverty reduction. Conclusion. While the U.S. may pursue high tariffs as a means of protecting domestic interests or correcting perceived trade injustices, such a policy often yields counterproductive results. It disrupts global trade, increases costs for consumers and businesses, provokes retaliation, and undermines international cooperation. In an increasingly interconnected world, unilateral tariff hikes are a blunt instrument that rarely achieve their intended goals without incurring significant collateral damage. A more effective approach lies in multilateral negotiation, domestic innovation, and targeted support for industries facing unfair competition. Impact on stock markets and personal consumption due to high U.S. tariffs. 1. Short-term effects. Stock market. Markets often react negatively to tariff announcements due to increased uncertainty. Export-heavy and multinational companies may see immediate stock price declines. Volatility typically rises, especially in sectors like manufacturing, tech, and agriculture. Personal consumption. Prices of imported goods rise quickly, e.g., electronics, clothing, household items. Consumers may cut back on non-essential spending due to price hikes. Confidence may dip if media and analysts signal risks of economic slowdown. 2. Medium-term effects. Stock market. Earnings reports may show declining margins due to higher costs and disrupted supply chains. Investors may shift to defensive stocks, utilities, consumer staples, and away from cyclical ones. Trade-dependent sectors underperform broader indices. Personal consumption. Sustained price increases may reduce purchasing power. Households adjust budgets, prioritizing essentials over luxury goods. Domestic substitutes may benefit, but not always at better value or quality. 3. Long-term effects. Stock market. Prolonged trade tensions and protectionism may dampen global investment sentiment. If companies relocate supply chains or operations, costs remain elevated, affecting profitability. Long-term investor confidence may weaken, especially in growth-oriented sectors. Personal consumption. Consumers adapt to new pricing norms but may permanently shift consumption habits. Inflationary pressures can persist, reducing real income over time. Widening inequality if lower-income households bear the brunt of cost increases. Conclusion. High tariffs may provide short-term protection to some industries, but they create broad economic ripple effects. Stock markets generally respond with caution, while consumers face both immediate and lasting pressures. Over time, both areas tend to suffer unless balanced by productivity gains, innovation, or new trade deals. Why Europe, China, and China-linked countries face the highest U.S. tariffs, a deep analysis. The United States' decision to impose higher tariffs on goods from Europe, China, and countries linked to China's economy is not arbitrary. It is the result of a complex mix of economic tensions, strategic rivalry, and geopolitical calculations. Below is an in-depth breakdown of the core reasons driving this targeted approach. China, the primary target. Massive trade imbalance. The U.S. has run a persistent and significant trade deficit with China for decades. Washington sees this as evidence of unfair trade practices, currency manipulation, and market access restrictions. State-led economic model. China's heavy use of state subsidies, SOEs, state-owned enterprises, and industrial policy violates principles of fair competition, according to U.S. officials. Tariffs are seen as a way to pressure China into leveling the playing field for U.S. companies. Intellectual property, IP, theft. The U.S. has accused China of large-scale IP theft and forced technology transfers. Tariffs are used as leverage to enforce intellectual property rights. Strategic rivalry. Beyond economics, China is viewed as the U.S.'s primary long-term strategic competitor. Tariffs are part of a broader strategy to decouple key sectors, like tech and semiconductors, and limit Chinese influence. 2. Europe, a surprising yet strategic target. Trade surpluses and tariff disputes. While not as large as with China, the U.S. also runs trade deficits with key European economies, e.g., Germany. The EU imposes higher tariffs on some American goods than vice versa, prompting retaliatory action. Subsidies and regulatory barriers. Disputes over subsidies, e.g., Airbus versus Boeing, have led to WTO cases and reciprocal tariffs. The U.S. also criticizes the EU for non-tariff barriers, strict environmental, food, and safety regulations that limit American exports. Geopolitical independence. Increasing European efforts to pursue strategic autonomy, e.g., on defense, digital policy, relations with China, sometimes clash with U.S. global interests. Tariffs may be used to apply pressure and reassert transatlantic alignment. 3 countries tied to China, e.g., Southeast Asia, Mexico, and others. Tariff evasion via supply chains. Many companies have relocated production from China to nearby countries, e.g., Vietnam, Malaysia, Mexico, to bypass U.S. tariffs. This is called transshipment. The U.S. has responded by monitoring and sometimes penalizing these countries to prevent backdoor Chinese exports. Supply chain dependencies. Countries deeply embedded in China's supply chains often produce intermediate goods destined for the U.S. market. These goods are still treated as China-related, especially if value added is minimal or components are Chinese origin. Geostrategic influence. The US is wary of China's growing influence in Asia, Africa, and Latin America through the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. Tariffs are used to discourage deep economic alignment with China and to reshape global supply chains toward US-friendly allies. 4. Broader strategic motives behind targeted tariffs. Reshoring and industrial policy. The U.S. aims to reduce dependence on foreign suppliers for critical industries, e.g., tech, energy, medical supplies. By targeting high-tariff countries, the U.S. incentivizes domestic manufacturing and friendshoring, shifting supply chains to allied nations. Leverage in negotiations. Tariffs serve as bargaining chips in broader trade negotiations, e.g., with the EU on digital taxes or with China on tech access. They're also used to force countries to adopt reforms or align with U.S. strategic interests. Conclusion. The U.S. imposes the highest tariffs on Europe, China, and China-linked economies not just due to trade deficits, but because of deep strategic calculations involving economic models, geopolitical alignment, and global influence. While tariffs are often framed as tools of economic policy, they have evolved into powerful instruments of statecraft in a world defined by great power competition. If you find this interesting, hit subscribe so I can share more analysis with you.